It doesn't matter what species you are. Losing someone close to you can cause a devastation that will last a lifetime. Camilla McKade opens her world and takes us back with her to just such a time. Present day. The pain had been slowly building over the past few days. Memorial Day was the hardest time of year for Camilla. There were so many memories and so many things that will never be made into memories for her and her family. Rubbing absently at the dull ache that resides in her chest over her heart, she felt its steady beat. Thump, thump, thump. At what point would this get easier for her? 14 years it had been, and she only had 11 years before that day. The pain still felt like it was just yesterday. May 2002. Camilla, honey, please, I need you to get dressed. Her mama stood in the doorway of her bedroom, and Cammy couldn't muster the energy to move. The bed dipped, and she felt the soothing hand of her mama on her back. Sweetie, please. Her voice cracked on the voiced plea. I know you're sad, but we need to do this together, as a family. The word family sounded foreign to her, because her family is no more. It had been just a week earlier when she ran to answer the ringing doorbell. She was the happy 11-year-old little girl on the cusp of her 12th birthday. Swinging the door open, her smile slowly fell as she saw the two men standing there in their dress blues on her doorstep. Hey, darling, is your mama home? She recognized these men from before when Mrs. Campbell's husband was hurt while on a mission with her dad. Sweet pea, who's at the door? The last word of her question trailed off, and Cammy looked at her mother in confusion. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth and muffled her gasp. Tears filled her mother's eyes as they all just stood there. Cammy was a smart girl. Her daddy had always told her that. But in that moment, she was lost as to exactly what these men were doing at her house. What is it, Mama? Is it Mr. Campbell again? One of the men, dressed in his neatly pressed army uniform, bent low and ruffled her hair gently. Sweetie, we need a moment with your mother. Her mother's hand reached out to her shoulder and patted it blindly. Camilla, I need you to go check on your brother. But, Mom... No buts. Just go, Camilla. Go now. Begrudgingly, Cammy moved to the hallway and started toward the stairs, but stopped and crouched just out of sight so she could find out what was going on. She watched as the two men came into the house, and her mother, on shaky legs, walked toward the living room. Cammy listened intently, but she still couldn't hear a word. The only sounds that pierced the air were her mother's wails. Defiantly, she stood up and stomped into the room. Who did these men think they were, coming into her house and upsetting her mama? If they knew who her daddy was, Captain Evan J. McKade of the United States Army Rangers, they would not be doing this. Her tiny fists were balled on her hips, and she was ready to give them a piece of her mind. Her daddy always called her his little Spitfire, and that was because she was fiercely protective of those she loved most, even her twin brother Camden. If he weren't out the neighbor's house right now, she was sure he would be just as mad at these two men as she was for making their mama cry. What did you do to my mama? Her voice still carried the prepubescent squeak, and she knew to them she didn't sound threatening. But if they saw what she could be, oh, then they would be afraid. Her shifter magic began to tingle in her lower spine, and in a flash her mama was on her knees in front of her. Tears streaked down her face, but it was like she knew what Camilla was about to do. No, sweet pea, no, it's not their fault. She looked over her mama's shoulder and scowled at the two men, still not convinced they hadn't hurt her mother. Pulled into a tight embrace by her mother, she heard her whisper, "Honey, no shifting. Control it, please." She was still young, and controlling the animal inside of her then was closely tied to her emotions. But she had been working on that with her daddy before he deployed 6 months ago. "Mrs. McKade, we're going to leave now, but someone will be in touch in the next 24 hours to make arrangements for you and your family." The tears still fell from her mother's eyes, and Cammy so desperately wanted to be clued in to what was going on. Little did she know it would be words she never wanted to hear from her mother. Her father, along with 2 other men in his battalion, were killed by insurgents while they were making a final sweep of an Iraqi village after they had rescued several families. Now, lying in her bed, with her mama perched on the side of it, she wished she could feel the peace in her heart she felt before they notified them of her father's death. Her daddy's body was brought stateside and home to Texas within a week. Today was her last chance to say goodbye. But if she stayed in bed, then they couldn't have the funeral, right? Then her daddy wouldn't really be gone. "Daddy would want you to be strong, sweet pea. You can do this for him." Turning her head so she could see her mother, Cammy looked into her mother's red-rimmed eyes. "If I go, then he's really gone, Mama. I can't." A few tears fell down her mother's cheeks, and they both startled, hearing Camden clear his throat and come into her room. Without a word, he launched into their mother's arms, and they both crashed onto Camilla. "I'll protect you both now. That's what Dad always said the man of the house does." They cried for a few more minutes and just hugged one another. Sitting up, Camilla tried to smile for her mama. They all looked like they had a major case of bedhead, and they would be laughed at if they went out in public looking like this. Her mother tried patting down Camilla's unruly hair and placed a kiss over each of her eyelids before releasing her head and taking Camden's and her hands. "Listen, I've laid out your dress, Camilla. We need to leave in 20 minutes. With that, she watched her mother leave the room to freshen herself up. Camden straightened his suit and stood. "I miss him too, but we need to say goodbye. Our dad is a hero, and he didn't raise us kids to be weak." It was hard to be mad at her brother because she knew he was hurting also, and she didn't want to take her rage out over her father's death on him. He was turning to leave when she called out to him, "Cam?" He turned in her doorway and looked back at her. "We're full-blooded shifters, right?" "Yes, Cammy, we both know this." "It's rare. There is a lot of our kind mixing with humans, and that's why there are so few of us jaguars now." "Yeah, we know this, Cammy. Mom and Dad have told us all about our heritage. What's your point?" "Why couldn't our pure blood save his life, then?" Her brother just looked down, and he kicked the frame of the door absently. "I don't know, Cammy." "But it's not fair. The magic should protect us." He sighed loudly and just shrugged. "Just get ready, okay, Cammy? Everyone's expecting us." With that, he walked out of her room, and she quickly threw on her dress and ran a brush through her dark brown hair, making herself look presentable. When she got downstairs, several family members milled about. Her mother took her hand and Camden's, and they walked out to the dark limousine waiting for the family. Pulling up to the church, they got out slowly, blinded by the hot Texas sun. She saw a sea of faces, some familiar, some complete strangers, all here for her dad. Some held American flags in their hands and were waving them proudly. Several of the men from her father's battalion stood at the edge of the hearse stoically. When the single door was opened, Camilla looked down at her black patent leather shoes. She couldn't watch. Her mother squeezed her hand, giving her a small amount of strength to look up for just a moment. The hot tears started to drip down her cheeks, and her heart pounded in her chest. The casket was draped in the traditional American flag. It was lifted and carried by 6 Army Rangers, men who should be celebrating this Memorial Day weekend with their families and friends, but were instead burying 3 of their brothers. A series of commands were called out, but she couldn't really make them out over the sobs that were taking over her body. Her mama pulled her into her side, and Cammy wrapped her arms around her mother's waist, looking for any amount of strength through the next few hours. They walked silently behind her father's body as several servicemen and women saluted their fellow soldier. Oh, she would move forward with her life, determined to make her father proud. But this day was one that would play over and over in her mind for the rest of her life. The eulogy was delivered by Sergeant Rhodes, her father's best friend, and forever burned into her brain the haunting echoes of a single bugler playing taps.